Hello there. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We've got lots of people filing in for this web event here, which I'm very excited to get started briefly. Um, just want to give people a few notes on the housekeeping, how we're running this event. First of all, it is being recorded, so if you registered to attend, you will receive a link to the webinar recording in the next couple of days. We do have time for some Q&A at the end, so if you haven't already, you can see the Q&A along the bottom of your Zoom window there. You can use the Q&A or you can use chat. I'll be monitoring both and asking Brant any questions at the end, or if it's important to interrupt him, I'll be monitoring it even during his presentation. So we're just about ready to get started, but I just wanted to say that when Brant and I first started talking, I was so flattered that he was in our network of innovators. He's an incredibly accomplished speaker and writer, and he's presented on a number of topics, but primarily I've heard his name around the subject of creativity and the entrepreneurial mindset. He actually wrote the book, The Lean Entrepreneur, and he's spoken at TEDx, and he's helped numerous companies bring some new products to market. When we first started talking, though, it was potentially to speak at Idea Scales Global Summit Open Nation, but as you all know, 2020 is an uncommon year for us. And in lieu of Open Nation this year, we've been featuring monthly talks on best practices and case studies. And this month, I'm really glad that Brant decided to talk about metrics and getting beyond the vanity metrics, particularly associated with innovation, because it's consistently picked as one of the top requested subjects for our events. So we've had a lot of positive feedback on it, and I'm excited to hear what you've got to share. So thanks so much, Brant. Take it away.
Thanks, Jessica. Happy to be here. So, are my slides showing?
Yep, I see it. Disruption for all.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, uh, super excited to talk about this. I truly believe that two things. One is that if we empower smart people, if we give them a wicked problem and we empower them to solve that problem, they will. And we sort of need to learn how to get out of the way of these of our teams to be able to solve problems. But that doesn't mean that there isn't accountability. And so the accountability then becomes, how do we measure their progress towards the desired outcome? And so this metric idea is near and dear to my heart, and I think it's really difficult. It's really hard for people to choose the right metrics, especially coming from large corporates where our metrics tend to be very execution minded, and we need to think differently. And so I have a few background slides here, and then we will dive into the specific methodology I have around determining what are the right metrics we should be tracking for the innovation program itself. So, we all know we're going through crazy times. In my view, the pandemic is an indication of the disruption that we're going through, not the cause of it. So yes, certainly it is caused disruption to our normal lives, but the scale and the scope of the pandemic is really an indication of sort of these larger transformational changes that we're going through. And to me, a lot of this is really based upon the fact that our organizational structures and the systems and processes that we have in place are literally based upon the industrial age. They are in many ways an extension of the assembly line. And this applies to not only corporates, but to all of our government bodies, from local governments up to federal governments. It applies to education, from elementary school and all the way up through postgraduate university programs. I believe that fundamentally these structures and how we do these things are going to change. It's not amusing, but it is interesting to look at even the fact that we're doing education online and sort of forced to it. And in my view, uh, teaching classes plus internet plus video is the sum of those is actually less than the parts. And we hope that just by combining these things, these three things, that the sum is greater than the parts. But I actually don't think that that's the case. What we have to do is reinvent that combination of those three things in order to produce the value that's promised out of those three, combining those three things. And so to me, that's just sort of an example of disruption. It's not about just taking the components and doing it the same way, but in sort of a different environment. It really requires us to reinvent the combination of those components. And the gist of it is that we're not in the industrial age anymore. And so the systems and processes and all of these things that we have in place aren't really working anymore. We're in this, whatever you want to call it, the information age or the digital age. And so we have to rethink this stuff. And when we do so, when we're in this rethinking and reinvention mode, what we are facing is massive amounts of uncertainty. And I want to differentiate between the uncertainty that we have some control over and the uncertainty that we don't. So, again, thinking about the pandemic, there's the uncertainty of when is this going to end? When are we going to be on the other side of it? And we can't control that. We can certainly take steps. We can protect ourselves. We can, wear masks and hopefully stem the spread. But we can't yet, and we can make vaccines. So that actually is the prevention part of it. But not all of us as individuals can contribute to that. As opposed to, say, the uncertainty of how do we manage people who are working remotely. That's something that we can actually address as individuals, as leaders. And so when I'm talking about uncertainty here inside of our organizations and inside of our work, and maybe even inside of our own personal lives, I want to focus on the uncertainty that we actually have some amount of control over. And that uncertainty is, it's massive. It's just absolutely incredible. And again, I think that this was happening even in core businesses before the pandemic, but the pandemic has brought that home. Suddenly, core business, their marketing, or their markets that they are focused on inside the core business have completely been upended, right? Small businesses are going out of business and consumers don't have the budget that they had to, and it's even become tighter. And so the very markets that our core businesses have been selling to are different. And so we have this new uncertainty and we have to deal with that. So the many in the quote unquote innovation industry describe the way we need to structure our business as being this split between, hey, 95 or 99% of our organizations are focused on execution mode, and hey, we're going to spin up this little innovation lab and they're responsible for learning mode. But as I've just discussed, uncertainty actually, the unknown actually exists all across the organization. And so it doesn't make, that bifurcation doesn't make sense. We actually have to learn how to balance executing versus learning all across the organization. Everybody needs to learn how to operate in this way. It's just the amount of the learning they need to do it differs based upon their job and where they are in the organization. And so the bifurcation actually sort of, the mentality around a bimodal system or the dual operating system ignores the fact that the core business actually has to go through this learning mode as well. I think that the big benefit to ideas, that when we're generating ideas, and even within the innovation programs we're generating ideas, is often that those ideas apply to the core business. And in some ways it's the ones that the leadership will tend towards, because they can see that the impact of resolving those unknowns, of exploring those unknowns and figuring out how to resolve them, is going to have a near-term impact on the business. But that doesn't mean that they really know, that core business knows how to do the learning mode. And so fundamentally, I think that this is the value that innovation people can bring. I think, in my view, they need to not focus on simply breakthrough innovation or this return on investment that they hope to see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road, but rather, how do I bring this learning skill set to the core business so that we can drive impact now? And in that way, we're going to get the budgets that we need to do the bigger ideas. So in mature portfolio management, all of those different time horizons are being worked on simultaneously. But I think the fundamental discrepancy here is that innovation has this role to play in core business. And the core business needs to understand that they need the innovation mindset in their core business in order to solve for near-term needs. And the innovation people need to understand fundamentally that they're not really going to get true budget, the proper budgeting for long-term innovation, if they're not actually able to drive near-term impact. And that's sort of the dilemma. But I think it's very solvable. And so part of it is my view that organizations need to think about what I call the 5 E's, the 5 elements of disruption poetry. And these are very much entrepreneurial or innovation mindset skills, in my opinion, that again should be applied across the organization. And so that's the empathy work, the understanding our customers deeply, not doing what they say, but understanding why they say what they say. So maybe this is through design thinking principles, experiments, so running specific tests to bust our assumptions. And so lean startup principles are great. This goes beyond merely prototyping. This is all across the business model. How do I measure our progress based upon the changed behavior that we're requesting? How do I run experiments in order to see if the customers are willing or the stakeholders are willing to behave in a particular way? Evidence is the data and the insights that we glean, and this is what we'll be talking about here in a little bit, is how do we generate this evidence? Equilibrium is about figuring out what the balance is between the execution and the learning that we must be doing in different parts of the organization. And finally, this ethics, I think, is super important as we learn more about our customers, as we develop true empathy and are running experiments to measure behavior. It's our responsibility to use that information in an ethical way. In other words, we're here to provide value to the customers and not to manipulate emotions or to respond in ways that take advantage of what we've gleaned through our empathy work. So thinking about the innovation program, the first thing I like to discuss is that we need to eat our own dog food. In other words, all of the skills that we have as innovators or this entrepreneurial mindset, some of those things that I was just discussing in the 5 elements, we have to apply that to ourselves. We have to act like an internal startup where the innovation program is our product and our customers are our internal stakeholders. And so now it's up to us to actually go and do empathy work for our colleagues. These are leaders, these are coaches, these are team participants, and other stakeholders inside the organization. We have to do empathy work to understand what their needs are and what their aspirations are, and understand how we're able to provide value for our internal stakeholders. And we need to run experiments to figure out what are the right components of our innovation program that will drive value across those time horizons that I mentioned and across the organization. So again, not just focused on long-term, but also understanding finance people and how their budgeting process works, and understanding legal and what the compliance issues are for them in ways that for when we need to engage with customers out in the public. And we need to let the evidence cut through our biases about what we should be doing and what our work should be entailing. And so even as an innovation program, we need to be agile and to change what we're doing based upon information that's coming in, as well as balancing our own needs to execute on our program, as well as continue to learn. We must be able to understand what's the difference between known, what do we know based upon evidence, and what we still need to learn. So some examples of how we currently tend to think about data and metrics really stems from the dominant side of the business, the execution side of the business, the part of the business that understands their markets very well and understands the products that must be delivered to that market and understands how to market and sell and distribute and manufacture for that market. Because the business is optimized around that execution, we understand, at least based on the past, we understand what are the things that we must do as a business, as individuals, as teams. Here are the things that we must do, the tasks that we must execute on in order to accomplish what our strategic priorities are. So assuming for a moment that there's not a bunch of uncertainty in there, which there is, of course, but forgetting the uncertainty for a moment, we've proven based upon our market dominance that we know how to market, sell, produce products for this market. Great. We're measuring people's performance based upon them doing the things that are in the proven blueprint on how to do that. And so we're measuring tasks, we're measuring repeatable tasks, we're measuring progress based upon even the calendar because we know we should be accomplishing XYZ by a particular date. When people discuss KPIs and OKRs, this is really what they're referring to. And so that's all fine and good, but it doesn't work in uncertainty. So it doesn't work anymore within the unknown side of our business. And so we have to look at these metrics in a different way. So learning metrics, their strategic objectives might be the same. We're still trying to accomplish these specific goals about revenue or customer growth or customer satisfaction. But the idea here is that we don't know 100% how we're going to achieve those strategic priorities. Or it could be that the strategic priorities are stating growth levels that or revenue that we expect to have in 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so we have an idea of how we're going to use our existing blueprints in order to get to a certain percentage of those priorities, but there's this gap, and that gap is represents the unknown, right? And so traditionally, this is what innovation has been responsible for, is filling those gaps. The problem is that the execution side of the business, the leaders in the execution side of the business are using execution metrics to measure you filling these future gaps. Doesn't work, right? So fundamentally, you have to be able to provide both execution metrics and these learning metrics that we're going to discuss. And it's based upon your understanding of what's known versus unknown. The learning side, the way you measure your progress towards achieving the desired outcomes on your path towards the strategic priorities, is based upon behavior change. And so what we have to understand when producing products and innovation for the future, we have to measure behavior change of our customers, of our users, in all of the innovation experiments and innovation in MVPs and those type of things that your program might be working on. We're using startup metrics to determine what is the right evidence that we can share with leadership that indicates that we're making progress towards filling that gap. So this, again, the same mentality exists in demonstrating value for your innovation program. So how you establish innovation program metrics is based upon the behavior change of stakeholders. So how you're going to measure your innovation program is from measuring behavior change of your internal stakeholders as they engage with your innovation program. Okay, how do we do that? So in my book, The Lean Entrepreneur, I introduced this concept of the value stream discovery tool. And back when I wrote this, it was really gauged towards startups and enterprises that are producing new products and services for their market. I like to point out that all models are wrong, some are useful. So you may find that your particular funnel that I'm describing here is different. The steps might be in a different order. There may be more steps, there might be fewer steps. So you want to be able to adapt this for your own needs, but it basically it represents pretty well the relationship between a product and its customer or user, and we can adapt that to really any project. Fundamentally, any project where somebody is creating something for a stakeholder, you can use this type of approach. So what I'm trying to do here is to get us to view a progress in the value that we're trying to create. We're trying to measure the progress, but from the customer's perspective. And so this is the fundamental difference between the learning metrics and the execution metrics. The execution metrics measure the activities that you go through, that the company does. But when we're in learning mode, what we want to do is measure the behavior of the customer, of the stakeholder, not the business. And so that's the fundamental flip that most people and organizations haven't gotten to yet. So we understand that we need to be more customer centric, but we don't drive that through our whole process. We go and do empathy work, and then we go back inside internally, and we throw the empathy work over to the engineering team, and they go off and they build and build and build, and we're right back into this execution mode, even though we still fundamentally are in learning mode. So, you know, using these techniques can actually help train your organization how to think differently. But so from a customer's perspective, the states that they might go through are like awareness. I've just become aware that this product or service even exists. I become intrigued when I learn a little bit more about it, and I believe that the company or the group is talking to me as a customer, as a stakeholder. They're talking to me. The value that they're promising is value that I need. I become trusting when I believe that this is the right program for me. I become convinced because my objections or my concerns are overcome, and I sign up, or a customer would pay. I become hopeful then. I've signed up. Is this really going to work for me? Am I really going to get the value that I want out of it? Are questions that I'm asking myself. I become satisfied when the value is delivered to me. And I behave in a very particular way when the value is delivered to me. When the promises has been kept, I'm satisfied. And then there's this additional state. I become passionate. Well, I hopefully become passionate. The mistake a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators make is this belief that the program or the product itself will drive this passion. And so we incentivize and we really try to push people to share on social media and do these other things that indicate this passionate behavior. But it really should be, initially, it's an organic thing. It's like, are my customers behaving in this particular way like they love us? And so we have to think about what are the additional steps that we might need to take to induce this passion, and it's separate from satisfied. So it's not based upon people having an idea that you're doing good things. It's that they've actually experienced the good things and that it's having this deeper impact. So we're going to dive into this stuff. And what I want to focus on is this idea first that we have to brainstorm who our stakeholders are internally for our innovation programs. And we want to think about them like just in any sort of idea change, mentality change. We have to think that about the life cycle adoption curve, right? So you're going to have early adopters, you're going to have early majority, late majority, and you're going to have these laggards. And so you want to be able to identify who are the first people that are going to sign up, who are eager to get this value that you're promising them. You want to understand them in a deeper way, like what is their aspirations and what are their what's the impact these people are hoping the program has on them. And then you're going to start imagining how might they interact with your program. That's why product here is in scare quotes. And so you can go through, we have a tool called a customer problem zoom. I started to modify this. I have a couple of other tools that might be of use, like a leadership zoom. The idea here is that you want to go do empathy work with your stakeholders. And so you can use a persona tool, the same sort of creating a persona that you might do with your customers, you want to do with your internal stakeholders, including leaders. And so there's this interesting, I always get sort of the raised eyebrows when I tell innovation people that they need to go get empathy for the senior leaders in their company. The idea is that the more that you can understand what their background is, where they're coming from, what keeps them up at night, what are the needs that they feel are immediate to them, how do they think about things like quote unquote innovation or future growth. And so this might take several meetings for you to get this out of your leaders or colleagues. But it's something that you really need to understand, because the deeper that you understand these individuals, the more likely you are to deliver value to them, just in the same way as creating a product for a customer. And I guess I'll pause here to mention that I meant to mention this earlier. This applies to any industry. This applies to nonprofits. It applies to startups. It applies to large companies. It applies to government. And so the term stakeholder is important here, because that allows you hopefully to imagine who are the beneficiaries of your program, no matter what industry you're in or no matter what type of organization that you're in. So we've done some really cool work with the city of Hayward, for example. And so their internal stakeholders included city council members, but also then included the council members' constituents. And so all of the people that lived in the city. And so those are two stakeholders, and you can imagine creating different personas based upon between those two different groups, and who might be the early adopters. Or it could be that, in cities, it's often the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, right? The people that actually show up to the city council meetings and are voicing their concerns over particular programs or particular problems that are facing their neighborhood. And so this doesn't mean, right? Empathy doesn't mean go and ask your customers what they want and do what they say. It doesn't even mean go understand what your customers need and resolve that need. The point is that you can't really prioritize your products and your solutions and what you're going to address without understanding what those needs are. So you separate the empathy work, understanding these people, from the decision to go on work on a particular item. There's a number of different criteria that you might use to determine what program you're going to focus on or product you're going to focus on. But the needs of these different various stakeholders certainly should be a part of that decision-making process. So anyway, you're doing a deep dive here, creating a persona for these different stakeholders, and then you construct one of these value streams for each of those stakeholder groups. So out of that value stream, what I shared before was the order in which the stakeholder views that value stream. So they see things in the order of, the value or the awareness, intrigued, trusting, etc. But that's not the same order that you, as the internal entrepreneur, as the internal startup team, that's not the order in which you would optimize. Obviously, if you go and you max out the awareness, like you go and tell everybody inside your company and you're shining a light on your, amazing new innovation program. If, however, you're not able to or have not figured out yet how to deliver value to those various internal stakeholders that you've just made aware, then you're really sort of burning your bridge, right? Everybody has their expectations set, yet you haven't figured out how to provide that value yet. So I just say that as an example that you don't go through this in that order. The order that entrepreneurs, startups must take is by beginning with satisfied. And part of satisfied is coming up with the intrigued part of it, because those work hand in hand, and really the intrigued part has a lot to do with your value proposition. So we have to start with what that value proposition is and how you think you're going to deliver on that, and that's where you're beginning. And so I want to step through these three states. If you nail these three states, intrigued, satisfied, and passionate, you have a highly functional program. You're successful. The other states come from or are around scaling and optimizing and iterating as needed for the various stakeholders. But if you're able to nail these three, you're well on your way. So let's take a deeper dive into each one of these states. So in my view, the intrigue state requires you to deliver your promise and some sort of aspirational message, and then you need to be able to share that message, and then you need to be able to measure the behavior that indicates that a stakeholder is intrigued. So Slack, when they first launched, they have their messaging was around, hey, we're providing the Slack tool for teams to communicate better, and you as a team leader are going to feel less busy. Less busy is sort of maybe a soft aspiration, but it's still something beyond just the communication tool itself. And that was on their website, and if you were intrigued, you would fill out a form in order to get access to the program. They had thousands of people fill out that form, which indicated that messaging was pretty good. Only 90% of the people that filled out that form ever took a second step. So that does not mean that the intrigued state was a failure. The intrigued state was successful because they got the thousands of people to fill out the form. The next step is merely other steps in that funnel. So that value stream is a funnel. We're measuring conversions between those states. And so the three components, again, of this intrigued state is the message that you're delivering, the behavior that the sort of the call to action, the behavior that you need to see in order to indicates that your stakeholder is in fact intrigued, and how you're measuring that. And so this message requires two components. What is the utility promise? So this is the underlying need of that particular stakeholder that you are addressing. And then, so an example might be that you're going to enable their employees to understand their customers way deeper, that they're going to uncover these customer insights that they can leverage. You also need to add an aspirational component. And this is really more this impact that it's going to have on that leader. And it can be very aspirational. It can be an emotional type of connection. And so maybe it would be something like that this leader is going to feel like they're a thought leader because they're one of the first leaders to have adopted this. And my employees are now generating these insights, and we're taking advantage of those insights. And I'm sharing that out, and people are giving me all sorts of praise, and my boss is giving me a bonus. So what is that? What is the impact that this program is going to have on, you hope that it's going to have on that leader? So the utility promise is something that you must deliver. The aspiration is something that you hope happens. It's a journey that you're on together, right? So one is a promise and the other is an aspiration. So you're going to provide this messaging to these leaders in some way, and then they're going to take some specific action that indicates that they're intrigued. And it could be that you make available to them more information. It could be that you're having a Zoom session where you're going to talk about the program. And the leaders that sign up and attend are indicating that they're intrigued. And so that's how you'll measure it, is you'll measure this activity that you did to make them aware, or not aware, but this messaging that you put in some channel that makes them intrigued in your program. And then what is the response to that? How many people signed up? How many people actually attended? So the next state that you want to focus on is satisfying. Well, what must you do to satisfy? Well, you have to deliver what you promised. And so what are the 3 specific features? And these are hypotheses. You start out with hypotheses and then you run the experiments in order to validate the hypotheses, okay? So we start with, we don't necessarily know what the program must be, but we're going to hypothesize that, and then we're going to use some of those innovation principles like experiments and empathy work in order to validate what we feel should be in the program. So 3 specific features of your program that will address that underlying need. And so maybe the 3 things that you're coming up with is we're going to provide these innovation sprints or workshops for leaders, employees. We're going to provide them ongoing coaching, and we're going to deliver impact reports to those leaders. What is the behavior that indicates that that leader, that stakeholder, is satisfied with your program? It's that they continue to send people into the program. If they do it once and they go away, then they're not satisfied. If they continue to do it, then they are satisfied. So think about like any sort of internet application. How would you measure an active, engaged YouTube user? Or at least think about the stakeholder of a YouTube user that was an original market segment. People that wanted to be YouTube stars, want to be internet video stars. So I might imagine that that segment, they would upload a new video once a week and share it with 100 of their friends. And so then you can imagine what are the 3 must things that YouTube would have to provide in order for that to happen. And then they measured that behavior. People that signed up and never uploaded a video are not in that stakeholder, or there's something wrong with the solution, the product. People that are in that stakeholder and they upload a video, but they don't share it with any of their friends. What is the problem why they didn't take the next step? And so then again, it requires you to go and do the empathy work and run experiments to figure out why you didn't get to that satisfied component. And so you're following the same methodology here, using the empathy experiments and evidence in order to figure out what are the right features of your program that delivers value to your stakeholders based upon their behavior is what's going to indicate that they're getting the value. Now, the metric might change over time. It could be that people are, like I've got here, that they send employees to 3 one-day workshops over 3 months. Well, maybe it's 1 workshop over 3 months. I mean, I'm not sure. It's a hypothesis, but you start with the hypothesis, and then you learn as you're going. And it could be like the number of calls per week as well. So the next state is, and so what is a behavior of a passionate user or a passionate stakeholder? You know, typically out in the product world, passion is indicated by some amount of loyalty plus something else. Something else is inviting other users, sharing their success stories on social media, acting as a reference, you know, or a testimonial or a case study. And so that's the same thing here. What you want is that passionate people are being, you know, they're doing voice, they're doing person-to-person marketing. They're marketing for you. They're putting new quote unquote customers or stakeholders into the top of your marketing funnel without you actually doing the awareness marketing. So it's word of mouth, right? So you can experiment with different parts of your program in order to see if you can achieve that level. And it could be that the experience is just so over the top, or the results of their employees doing the work is so over the top successful that drives the passion. And so it could be that that as a leader, I believe that this program is important for the business to thrive and survive, and I experience the program and I believe that this is going to have this impact. So now I believe I'm on the same journey as the innovation program, and therefore I'm going to shine a light on it when I'm talking to other executives. So you know, again, you posit what the behavior is, and you experiment with your messaging as well as the program in order to get that behavior. And so it could be number of referrals or shout outs within particular channels inside your organization. And then that's how you're going to measure the passion part of it. So I was helping an entrepreneur in Toronto several years now who was building a music app. And the utility promise he made to me, and I was just mentoring, so I wasn't really a customer, but the utility promise was, if your kids use this music app, they will be practicing their music lessons more. And so, you know, as a dad that loves music, I was paying for my daughter to take singing lessons. And so I was intrigued by that message, because my daughter never practiced. She likes music, but she never practiced her lessons, right? And so the utility promise, your daughter will practice their music lessons more when they use this app because of this app. So I'm all like, boom, on it. I asked the entrepreneur, why are you building this app? And he said, well, because I want to save parents money. And I was all like, that was a head scratcher. I was like, that doesn't really resonate. And I said, no, that's I don't think that's right. Why are you driven to make this app? And he's all like, oh, well, I guess it's because I'm a musician. And I go, yeah, that's interesting. What about being a musician? He says, I want kids to grow up to love music. And I said, yeah, me too. That's why I'm paying for music lessons. Money's not the issue. I want my daughter to grow up and love music like I do. And so the entrepreneur can't promise that my daughter is going to grow up to love music. I can't either. But the three of us can go on this sort of journey together with this hope, this aspiration that she'll love music. And that journey is important to me. And so that makes me a quote unquote passionate customer. So hopefully, you know, maybe that helps in sort of summarizing this idea around the intrigued messaging, including both that utility promise plus the aspiration, the satisfaction being, okay, well, I must provide this functionality in order to fill that promise. And then the passion then comes with me feeling real, that I'm actually asking my stakeholders to join me on this journey. And there's specific ways that they can participate in that journey. So I want to summarize here a little bit on, I want to being agile inside of an organization and being agile as innovation people. And we all know the word, and I kind of say this is agile with a small a. And then I will leave time for questions here, but let me summarize up here real quickly. So the key component in my view for this to work is to be able to differentiate between known and unknown. And right now, your company's leadership have a number of initiatives underway, and these both could be customer facing or their internal initiatives that face a lot of uncertainty. But this uncertainty is not a variable that people are taking into consideration. And I think this is like super important that we start to address it. Again, the pandemic drives this home. I talk to a lot of leaders and they're like, oh, we just have to buckle down. We have to buckle down. And what they mean is, because this is really sort of 20th century leadership techniques, which I think is fine and it's great in execution mode. But there's this feeling, you know, like we have to buckle down, we have to execute harder. And at this point, I think we're just sort of squeezing blood out of turnips. And the other part of that is, what are we executing on? Because if things have changed, then we're executing within uncertainty, and that leads to failure. And so we really want to be able to evaluate what is known versus unknown. And so this is one method here on how to do it, is you rank the existing initiatives or initiatives that we could be working on based upon how we think that what the impact is, high versus low on the vertical. And then on the horizontal, what do we have high confidence in or lower confidence in? And that confidence is based upon uncertainty. It's based upon, do we have the capabilities? Do we understand the stakeholders? Do we understand what the needs are and what's necessary and so on? So the upper right quadrant is, hey, we're super high confident and it's high impact. So that's pure execution mode. Brilliant. Go work on those, fund those, put them into the PMO. It's boom, go do it. But anything that starts to reveal this less confidence and this uncertainty, then those are great programs for the innovation to contribute to, because they have those skill sets in applying this entrepreneurial or innovation mindset to do the learning mode. And the further to the left that you go, the more I think that the innovation group should actually own those initiatives. But the ones, the lesser uncertainty, those are where we should be bringing the innovation mindset skill set to the core business, because they have to learn how to reduce the uncertainty before they go into execution mode. So I think that this maybe is a useful tool for you to take a look at. If anybody wants the actual tool, it's available on startupbluebook.com. I also think that thinking into the future, we can actually organize our teams based upon tackling the uncertainty that exists within these conversion states. So if we were viewing our programs and our products and our services based upon a funnel from the customer's perspective, we'll understand where the gaps are. We'll understand where, if we improve the conversion of a particular metric that represents the gap, the conversion between these two different states, and we focus our empathy experiments, balancing, execution, and search on that metric, and we form a team based upon the skills that are best able to resolve that, everything that those teams should do is driving us towards achieving our objectives. You can draw a direct line between what those teams are working on and what our strategic priorities are. And that's really, those are the powerful metrics. And again, they're based upon measuring the behavior. And so it's measuring our progress of converting the unknown into the known. How we can do that as an organization is building the unknown parts into our sprints. And so if you're using Agile enough that your organization is doing, looking at your backlogs and constructing these sprints, I believe everybody in the organization should be doing this. So that's, maybe a transformation that still has to happen, but you can do this in an informal basis. I'm not suggesting really that everybody has to go through a rigid implementation of Agile, like SAFe or Scrum. but rather take the components of the Agile Manifesto that make sense and start building this idea of, as teams, figuring out what we're going to work on, and simply build in the learning mode into every sprint at some level based upon the need for balance between execution and learning. If one goes down this path, then you need what I call the team of teams, which is basically a coordination of all of those different agile teams to make sure that the larger entity is being represented, that the contexts are being shared among the teams so that we understand the bigger picture. And then there's another level of hierarchy that matches the what that larger context looks like in terms of progress towards the strategic priorities that the company has. So obviously we can go way more in depth here, but I want you to see how the learning metrics actually form the bottom of the pyramid. They form the basis of being able to more readily connect our metrics with strategic priorities. So I will pause there. Thank you very much, and happy to then take some questions.
Thank you so much, Brant. That was great. I mean, I got a lot from that presentation. One I'll definitely use again is most methodologies are wrong, but some are useful. Definitely applies to a lot of people, particularly people who are starting to build their innovation programs and want to apply a methodology, but then need to adapt it inevitably. And I really loved about the empathy with leadership work, how I think that we've seen that borne out, that it's a key determinant of program success, doing that work. And I love that story about the Toronto-based music app that shows the difference between like the extrinsic value you're delivering on, but also the aspirational vision that you're going towards together. So we've had a few questions come in for the little time we have left. One was, do you have a framework or a technique to establish a baseline for subjective learning mode metrics, like measuring behavior, stakeholders, and how to objectively measure that you're driving change from that baseline?
Yeah, so my framework really is that value stream. In other words, it's not easy, believe me. I mean, most organizations struggle with this. As a matter of fact, I sort of the only group that I think understands this natively now, and it's probably been a learning thing, are startup investors, because they know that they're not going to get a return for many years, and so they sort of intrinsically know how to measure this progress, and so in my view, the way that you come up with those metrics is to simply imagine, right? This is how you hypothesize. You imagine, well, what is the behavior of that particular stakeholder if they are getting the value that I've promised them? And so that's what some of the examples I was trying to illustrate. If I have a stakeholder a business leader who is interacting with my program by submitting challenges that they want the innovation team to tackle, or submitting individuals to serve as coaches, for example, go through a coaching program, or making employees people to be able to join those teams in order to, like, they'll send people to those workshops or sprints in order to learn how to do that. If they continue to do that over time, then that indicates that they are satisfied. And so you can measure all of that stuff in an analog fashion. I mean, literally, you can just put it up on whiteboard and do counts month over month. Over time, however, you can start automating that by providing mechanisms like forms to fill out in order to submit people, or those type of things that can start to automate those metrics. I hope that answers your question. Please feel free to reach out, brant@brantcooper.com. Or I'm on LinkedIn, Brant Cooper. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to dive into that more deeply.
One of the other things that I thought was interesting is that not all parts of the value chain are like equally important, or at least not where you focus your attention right away. That the intrigued and delivering on that value was where you need to focus your attention first. But somebody asked the question, so are you not measuring trusting, convinced, or hopeful?
Yeah, I think you should measure those. I think that they are important when you're scaling. And so I mentioned those first three. I didn't really want to take up the whole hour, trying to rushing through those seven. I think that the idea is that if you focus on those three, intrigued, satisfied, and passionate, you've got a functional program going. And so the other metrics come in when you want to scale and you're optimizing that funnel. And when you, like, for example, if you're doing this for a particular stakeholder that are early adopters, maybe it's a business unit that has, for example, zombie applications out in the market, and they actually want to learn which ones they should kill. You could use the innovation program to go and see if any of those should be killed. The moment you start taking that to other parts of the business, you might see that your funnel isn't working anymore, even though you've proven out the intrigued, satisfied, and passionate. And it might be that some of those other states are going to be emerging then. Like you have to use different techniques in order to. So again, those other states come when you're trying to optimize and trying to scale.
We have another question here about other influencing factors that might impact the magnitude of what you're measuring. How should you consider those is the question.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not really understanding that question. I don't know if Shri is still available to give me more information, but I'm not actually. I don't know. Maybe Jessica, you have some ideas what Shri is
I
explaining.
don't. I asked Shri if he could give me some examples, and if you're there, Shri, just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll unmute you, and you can explain more. Um, One of the questions that we had as well was, can you tell a story about a time when an innovation team was able to first understand and then deliver on stakeholder needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it tends to be one of those things where it's only thought of after the program is in existence. Um, so uh, so we were working with a very large insurance company, and they launched this whole initiative where they built up their own coaching program, and they were doing their own workshops and even their own internal accelerator programs. And at the beginning, the innovation program itself, we're sort of working on their ideas, right? So it was, here's what we think we should be working on. And they were struggling to get any sort of traction inside the organization. In other words, they didn't really have the number of people to be able to operate on all as these accelerator teams. And again, this is sort of fundamental to the wrong idea, in my opinion, about this bifurcation between the core business and the innovation program. If the innovation program figures anything out, the only way that they can actually scale is by getting people from the core business. Um, and and uh, and so this is where that team was struggling. So they started doing the empathy work and then started doing the innovation challenges based upon what the leadership needs were, what the leaders' ideas were. And suddenly, of course, the leaders become very enthusiastic because
Right.
now these
Switched
innovation teams,
on.
what's that?
Like it suddenly all got switched on, right? The lights came
Right. Well,
on.
they started seeing evidence that somebody else is actually generating evidence for their idea that solves one of their needs. Then that became like, wow, that was like huge. So almost, Jessica, almost doing it wrong in the beginning showed how like impactful it was by doing it right
Right.
afterwards. I see Shree's question here now. So there's two things that I think are super interesting about your question. So I'll repeat it here. So Shree gave an example as, for example, someone not showing up, repeat customers that don't show up for your for whatever workshop or maybe for the webinar. So that's super interesting. So there's two things there. One is that you need to go do empathy work to try to figure out why they didn't show up. So you can't just leave it up to the data that says they didn't show up, right? This is another big mistake that both entrepreneurs and innovators and people that are looking at data, decisions need to be informed by data. The data doesn't make the decision. And so once you get data like this, they're not showing up, then you have to go figure out why. And that's the empathy work. And it could be that you just need to simply provide more calendar options and then they would show up. Or it could be that not showing up is a leading indicator to churn. In other words, you were right, they're not showing up because they're not getting the satisfaction. Well, so then the deeper dive, the empathy work that you do there is an indication that you need to maybe modify the program, but maybe not. It also could be that they're a laggard. And so there's so many questions that go unanswered by the data. The data raises the question, the data doesn't answer the question. And so I think that one way to think about it, Tree, is to think of like I have a bunch of engaged customers. What is the leading indicator to churn? Like, if I look at a particular metric and I'm not seeing the number I should be, does that mean that they are going to, in the near future, leave the program? And that's a super powerful metric. It's kind of an advanced metric, but it's super powerful if you can come up with what that metric is.
Well, I think that's a great answer and a great place to end. We've already used up our hour, but I think it was a very rich discussion of how we can bring value throughout the innovation life cycle. So thank you so much for these best practices, Brant, and anyone can follow up with him afterwards. We'll be sending out a link to the video recording, and thanks so much for joining, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.